Okay, today's plan is to go through chapter 15, the first part of it. We're not doing the entire part of the chapter. Exporting assets, so things that you make in Illustrator, which is vector art, that we want to export for use on the web. So we want to make PNGs, JPEGs, SVGs, GIFs, that type of thing that we can use on the internet. So it's very similar to what we did in Photoshop. We're gonna export things, full artboards and specific assets. Then I'm gonna tell you what your homework is for that project. And then the rest of the day is gonna be work time on your label or tea bag and or this project. Next week on the 10th is when the label is due, and so is this web banner that you're gonna do. And then also I'm going to show you the rubric for the final project, which is the house that we talked about last week. So this won't take long. You'll be have work time very soon. So we will jump into Learning Plan 15. Oh, for crying out loud, how many times do I have to sign in? This is literally like the 4th time. Okay, so we are going to go into chapter 15 and open the start file. L15 start. One thing, those of you that are in Photoshop, which is pretty much everybody, I sent out a message to make sure that you switch back into that color space of the general purpose. We switched into the pre-press space yesterday, and if you don't switch back, every time you open anything, you're going to keep getting warnings. You're in a different color space. Do you want to go on? You're going to see warnings that you haven't seen before. So once you're done with that chapter, if you were in class, we're done with it. Make sure when you're back in Photoshop, you go into Edit, Color Settings, and you switch back to North American General Purpose 2 instead of a pre-press, so you don't get those color warnings. Okay, back in Illustrator, we have a font. It's a Typekit font, so we let it find it. And what is all this? Okay. So this is the file that they've given us in Illustrator. It is finished. We just need to start making it work for web output if we want to use some of these graphics in our web space. So let's first do a file, save as, and call it your name, and then, I don't know, Galactic, Galactic, Galactic. All right, make sure that nothing is selected on the artboard. And when we do things in Illustrator, remember it's vectors. It's just dot to dots, and they can be placed anywhere on this canvas or this artboard. And to make a square or the rectangle, let's just look at this search button that they have right here. That rectangle, because it's an Illustrator as a vector, the 4 corner points can be anywhere on the grid. But when we output to use on the web, so on a screen, on a phone, on an iPad, it's being shown with pixels, right? And pixels are squares. And the whole square has to light up. So to get your design to be pixel perfect, that dot to dot could land somewhere in the middle of that square, and as a vector, it's going to look fine. But if that tries to reproduce as pixels, it can't just light up the bottom half or the bottom corner of that pixel like the vector's telling it to. It has to shift and light up that whole square. So whenever possible, we want to make our designs pixel perfect, meaning that the borders fit exactly to the edges of the pixels so that it's clear on a screen. We can see that when we zoom in to a really high mode. So take your selection tool, click on the Earth graphic in the center of this, and then let's zoom in and keep zooming up to 600% or higher. At this point, why am I not seeing it? We should be seeing the pixel grid. You guys see the pixel grid? What the heck's going on?
They not do that in the update anymore? Or is it because it's vector?
I just did this, yes, I just looked at this yesterday and it worked fine.
Why would there be a pixel grid if it's vector?
Because if you zoom into 600% or higher, you actually see where the grid is. If you zoom in high enough, you do see it. Oh, pixel preview, that's why. I must have had that on all along. So view, pixel preview, sorry. Got ahead of myself. There they are. So in Photoshop, when you keep zooming in, when you hit a certain point, you see the pixels. In Illustrator, you have to turn it on because, kind of like you said, Michael, it's not technically part of it. So at 600% or higher, you see this. So look at the rounded part of the circle. In the vectors, it's just telling it to fill in from the dots to the dot in a solid color. But when it turns into pixels, if it has to be pixels, if we're going to output it that way, it says, oh, okay, well, I have to do a white square here, but a lighter square here. And on a circle, that's fine. But if you think about a rectangle, you wouldn't want it to be off-centered. You wouldn't want half of the square to be a light gray and half of it to be a dark gray. So on this one, it's fine. This is the pixel preview. We can see how this would reproduce. All right. So when we're in this pixel preview, you'll be able to see the grid and align artwork to it. So because this preview is turned on, it understands that wherever possible, it should snap to this grid and fill in a whole square. Go back and do a fit in the window so we can see everything. And we're going to click on this search button, which does have hard edges. And then we're going to zoom in on that and get up to over 600% so that we can see the pixel grid. All right, do you guys see the actual corner where the anchor point is up here on this top right corner, for example? Do you see how it's not aligned to the grid? It's up a little bit higher above that pixel. So these pixels are filled in with a perfect color of blue, but the ones above it, because like a third of it is still inside of our actual design and 2/3 of it is outside of it, they decided to fill that in with a lighter blue, which when you're zoomed way out, you don't notice so much. Look at the box around it. It's lined up nicely down here, but up here we have some weird corners as well. So I'm going to really zoom in on mine and show you this top corner. You see how the anchor point of the vector artwork is not perfectly aligned to the grid at all. Backspace, or not backspace, sorry. Back out a little bit so that you can see the whole rectangle. And what we're going to do is we're going to delete this rectangle out. So just hit delete and get rid of it. We're going to grab the rectangle drawing tool and we're going to draw a rectangle roughly the same size as the one we saw. And just don't pay any attention, just kind of draw one out. And I kind of did the same thing because I wasn't paying attention to the grid. The rectangle that I drew out in Illustrator does not perfectly line up to this grid. My anchor points aren't perfectly aligned. And that's just the way Illustrator behaves because it doesn't assume there's a grid or a grid issue. So wherever you click, that's where the anchor point goes, and wherever you drag out, that's where the last anchor point goes. So not so good. The snap to the grid is not turned on, so that's why it turned out that way. Push deselect to get rid of it again. And then up in the view menu, we're going to choose, where are you? Snap. Down here towards the bottom, we're going to choose snap to the pixel. Turn that one on. And then go ahead and draw out a rectangle again. And now no matter where you started drawing, it's smart enough to snap to the exact corner of that pixel grid and give you a perfect rectangle, lighting up all of the pixels with that full color, not worrying about where your anchor points went. So it literally will snap to the closest corner of the grid when you have that turned on. And when you're designing assets that you're ultimately going to use for digital, for the web, for phones, for apps, you want them to be pixel perfect so that they light up perfectly clean on phones and on other designs, okay? So with that turned on, it's going to be smart, which is helpful. Go to the Properties panel, And with this rectangle still selected, choose Arrange and then Send to the back so that the word search comes back. And then if you need to, with your selection tool, move that rectangle around so that it looks a little bit more centered. And notice that wherever you drag it to, it's going to snap to the grid again. So there's one where we turned on that feature and drew it out originally to have it snap to the grid because we turned it on and then drew. We can also align existing artwork to the grid, which is something that's probably more likely to happen. Zoom out a little bit. Click to select this other blue rectangle that's around the whole navigation bar. And if you're zoomed in enough, you can see that this is not pixel perfect, that the bounding is not perfectly aligned. And then in the Properties panel over here, we have an option, a quick action, Align to the pixel grid. That showed up because we had it turned on and it thinks, well, that might be something important now. So here's a quick action. Click it, Align to the pixel grid, and it shifts it down and over and makes it exactly 2 pixels wide rather than 2.2 or whatever it used to be. Okay, to the left of this button, select this V, and I'm going to zoom in on it so we can see it a little bit more dramatically. Okay, so something that has horizontal or vertical lines, it can snap to the grid very easily, but this doesn't have any lines that are horizontal or vertical. The actual line in Illustrator is this line right here. It's a diagonal line, and that's what it's trying to put like a 1-point or a 2-point stroke on, and the only way it can do that is light these up in this pattern to make it look like a V. All right. That Make Pixel Perfect doesn't show up over here as a quick action right now. So if you don't see it there, it's also in the menu. We can go up here and do Object and then Make Pixel Perfect about halfway down. And when you click on that, selection contains art that cannot be made pixel perfect. That's because, like I said, there's no horizontal or vertical lines. The actual vector line is diagonal and it doesn't know how to deal with that. No edges to line up. We're going to click on the blue square surrounding this V. I need to zoom out a smidge. And is this one pixel perfect right now? Nope. Right? First thing we're going to do is just drag this top bounding box to make it a little bit bigger. And when we did that, the top line automatically snapped to the grid because we have that feature turned on. Can't talk today. And we pulled that bounding box up so that one snapped, but notice that the other 3 didn't. So you could either do this side by side by side by side, which takes quite a bit, but it's only going to do one thing at a time. Do a Command Z to undo that and bring it back to its original size. And then over in our Properties panel, we're going to click on that Align to the Pixel Grid again. See how it shifted it just a little bit to get it to all light up perfectly? Okay, now that it did that, chances are that this V is not perfectly centered anymore. So we're going to hold down the Shift key and select the V shape inside also. There we go. And then let go of your Shift key and click on the square one more time to set it as the key object. So we're going to center it based on that key object. And then in our alignment panel over here on the right in the properties, we're going to do a vertical align center and a horizontal align center. And that's going to put that V in the middle of the box that we just shifted ever so slightly. Okay, click away to deselect and save your file. So after you draw things out in Illustrator with no regard to pixels, like you should, because you're not thinking that way, if you know it's going to be output for use on screens, you want to go back and make sure that your assets are pixel perfect. So that's a button that you know is going to be exported. the search button, that rectangle that we just did, is going to be a button that gets exported. So making it pixel perfect is important. All right, exporting the artboard itself and specific assets. This is very much like Photoshop that we did a week or two ago. If you used Illustrator or even Photoshop, several versions ago, there was something called slicing, where you would like take a graphic, especially in older days when the internet was slower and most of us had dial-up and we had to wait for it to connect. Uploading a picture that, or a button even, that was 2 inches wide by 1 inch tall, let's just say, would be, let's say 100K was the weight of it. That's how long it would take to download. So in the older days, we would actually take a slicing tool and cut it into 4s, and then each one of them was a smaller piece and they would load faster. And you'd see your button kind of puzzle together. We don't have to do that anymore, thankfully, so slicing doesn't exist. Now we just use the great feature that they have built in of the export as, and we tell it what format and what optimization we want, like what size of making it smaller. All right, we can output to PNG, SVG, PDFs, JPEGs. Anybody know what SVG stands for or what it is? Probably heard of PNGs and GIFs and JPEGs. SVG is scalable vector graphic. So it's kind of like having Illustrator for the web, meaning if you did a logo in that size and I was looking at it on my phone, it would scale down well and look good. But if I suddenly looked at it on this and I zoomed in, it would keep scaling and looking good all along. Pixel perfect, but it knows how to scale itself. So SVGs are pretty popular, especially because we have so many different ways of viewing things now. It's not just a computer screen. Now we're on our phones and pads and tablets and whatever. All right, turn off our pixel preview. So under View, turn off the pixel preview, and then doesn't that V look much nicer? That's how we see it in Illustrator. Put your whole artboard back on the screen. And we're going to export this entire artboard for screen viewing. So we'll go up to File, Export, and then Export for Screens, this top option. And this should look really similar to what we're used to seeing. Notice again, there are 2 options here. Make sure that artboard is the one that's chosen over here because we want to export the entire artboard. But notice that we can just do assets as well, just individual pieces like buttons or graphics. Artboard is selected. Over here on the right, there's only one artboard in this document, so saying all is the same thing as saying page 1. Notice that include bleed is checked. So if that's something that's important to you, you can check or uncheck that. We want this to be sent to our lesson 15 files, and right now it's sent to the cloud. So click on the folder to the right and just navigate to wherever you have your chapter 15 files. And choose chapter 15. In the format menu, you can choose how to export it in scale, because remember, Illustrator is resolution independent. So this could be tiny, this could be 50 feet tall. It's going to look exactly the same. So 1x, or exactly at its size, is what the default is, and that's fine. And then from the format menu, we're going to choose JPEG 80. So that's a smaller, it's more of a compression. It throws away a little bit of data, but it still gives us a good look. JPEG 80. All right. And then if we're happy with that, we're going to say export the artboard. And it says, okay, where do you want to put it? We had already said we wanted it in lesson 15, so it's in here. It made a folder called 1x because that's We could have done 2x, 3x, 5x, or we could have done all of them. That's kind of the cool thing. We could have, in one step, told it to export a bunch of different sizes, but it automatically makes folders for us. So inside this one, we see Artboard 180, and that's the one that we just did. And if you want to see a little preview of it, you can just change your view to see a thumbnail versus a list. So there it is. It's all done for us. All right, back in Illustrator, that's how we do the whole artboard. But now if we want to do just specific assets, so we maybe want to have our Earth graphic as an option of a button that we want. So we want to export that as a JPEG or a PNG or something. Now we do the actual assets. Also, the cool thing with this is that when we choose an asset, we can export it to multiple different formats, a JPEG, a PNG, and an SGV. We can export it as exact size, half size, double size, all in one click. So we're not redoing that step over and over and over again. All right, select the artwork on your artboard of Venus and zoom in on it, but make sure that you can still see the Earth graphic to the right of it. So select Venus, and then we're going to hold down the Shift key, and we're also going to select the Earth graphic so that both of those are selected, and then the bounding box goes around both of them. And to export, we can go the way we just did under the File, Export, Export to Screens, or we can just go to the Window drop-down and ask it to load the Asset Export window, which is this one. It's very similar. And at the top it says drag artwork here, and each group is added as an asset. So we can literally bring them into this panel just by dragging. So we're going to drag this from our artboard over to here, and when it lights up and says asset number 1, you can let go. And it knows that there's two things, asset 1, asset 2. These assets are tied to the original artwork in our document, so if we updated it in the document, if we went back here and made Venus pink, it would update in our asset panel as well. They're linked. They'll also remain in this asset export window until we do something with them. Either we delete it or we add more and move on. So they're just going to sit in here waiting for something to happen. Nothing has happened yet. We haven't told them what size to be down here and exported them yet. Let's name them better. So click on that first one on the name and rename it Venus, and click on the other one and rename it Earth. Select just the Venus asset. So in this window, click on Venus so that it is the only one that has the outline around it, not Earth. And then we're going to go down to this bottom part, and we're going to decide how we want to output it. SVG is a great option. And so we're going to do click on the ping part and come down to SVG. Notice that that scaling went away. It's not asking you what size it wants to be or you want it to be, because a scalable vector graphic knows how to scale all on its own. It can be half size, it can be quadruple size. It doesn't matter, it knows that. So that's the first thing. But then our web people say, you know what, we might want pings, or I want a ping for that also. So we click on this add button and we get a second line, and it says, okay, what do you want to do? We want to do a PNG, which has a transparent background. It takes your graphic and puts it on a transparent background for use on the web. And we want to do that at 1 scale, not double. So normal size, 1 times scale, a ping. Making sure that we still have Venus selected up here, these two rules are going to be applied to it when we click export. So you can go ahead and do that. And then it says, okay, where do you want to put it? We're going to put this in a subfolder called assets, not in the main folder, because that's our whole artboard. So in the asset export, we're going to say choose, and it runs through it. And then if we wanted to see if that's really what happened, we can go to our Finder and go to where we have our files. And in the Asset Export folder, I have Venus as a PNG or a PNG file at normal size, and I have Venus as a scalable vector graphic, all made for us. So this is where all your assets would go. And you can imagine if you do a whole mock-up in Illustrator and you want to export all the different buttons and the logos and the search button and your navigation, whatever, this is a great way to do it very quickly. All right, the last part of this chapter we are not talking about because it's all about CSS. So you can actually make a design in Illustrator, and the rules that you apply to it as far as type or other rules, kind of your character and paragraph styles, can be exported into CSS. So CSS is what you're going to learn next semester when you take Web Dev 1. So HTML is the code that writes the web page, like the words that show up and the pictures that show up. CSS is the style. What font, what color, do the pictures have drops, shadows, it's all the pretty. So it's pretty cool to think that a program like Illustrator can generate that code for you, but it's ahead of our time right now. We'll have to look at that later. So remember, after you take the class next spring and understand CSS, you might want to pop back into Illustrator and test this out and see how it works. It's pretty interesting, I think. So that's quite simple, right? Everybody feel comfortable with how that export works? It's very much like Photoshop. Okay, that's the end of that chapter already. Your assignment, to show that you know what's going on here, is to do a web banner, and it's going to be due by the end of class next week also. So, specifically, because you're like, oh, what should it be on? How big should it be? Oh my God, decisions. I don't want to think right now. I'll help you. Remember that music festival poster we did? Now they come to you and say, hey, make us a web banner. We're going to put it on this website as an advertisement. You know, the local radio station is going to run our banner on their website. So, hopefully you all still have these files and designs. So you're going to make a web banner advertising your festival. Should it look like this? Anyone? Should it have the same look and feel? Yes, it should. They should go together. They should look cohesive. When people see it, they should go, oh, I saw that poster at the mini mart yesterday. So you're going to take that, and not all of it, don't get me wrong. Web banners don't do that because you click on them to go to a website and learn more, right? That's the whole point of them. So you're not going to list all the bands, but you are going to list what it is, when it is, where it is, and maybe, you know, more information. Click here, or some dumb thing like that. People kind of know that whole idea of early days of the internet where we had to say click here are kind of gone. People know the minute they hover over something that they see the hand, or just by habit, we click on stuff, don't we? Like we're so trained in that. I have to tell you an embarrassing story. I was looking at the back of a magazine, and like the ad, and I actually swiped on it. Like I wanted to see something new, and I swiped. Oh my God. This is a magazine in your hands, you idiot. So, web banner. Use Illustrator as the primary software, the only software. Well, the banner, not he banner. Whoops. The banner should be 728 pixels wide by 200 tall. So there's your sizing. Make sure that things are pixel perfect. Once you're done, zoom way in, turn on the grid, and make sure that things are shifted so that they're going to look nice. Use only Adobe Typekit fonts so that when I see it, everything works. Okay, local to these computers or Typekit. Then kind of the usual. Use guides, duplicate, shadows, colors to achieve a professional banner. Advanced level detail from previous chapters. So if you did well on these and you gave it some excitement, you're probably going to be fine. If there's a way to add a little bit of oomph to this, go ahead and do that. Then export the banner as a PDF. That's an option in the drop-down. a PNG, and a JPEG 80, all at normal scale, 1x. Upload all 3 to Blackboard. And that's it. Does that make sense? Oh, there's more. Demonstrate ability to work on your own at a challenging level. The banner should look unified with the poster. And then an artist statement. Explain what you did and why you made the choices you did and how will they impact the client and the consumer. So think about, you know, I kept the same look so that there's recognition. People know that it's our same event based on our posters. And hopefully this will drive people to their website to buy tickets or whatever. Okay? So it'll be 3 items and an artist statement, which can either be a Word document that you upload or it can be put right in those comments in Blackboard. Right? Finally, your last rubric is the house. So that rubric is right here. The last day of class, which will be Tuesday the 17th. So next week, we have to go over one more chapter in the book. So again, under an hour of lecture, the rest of the time is work time with those 2 projects due at the end. Your label and your web banner. The final day, Tuesday the 17th, we'll have donuts and fun food, whatever we want to bring, a little breakfast. And your house is due by the end of class, and that's it. So here's the rubric for the house. Challenging. This is your final, show me what you got, how much you learned, etc. Use a photo to recreate a vector drawing of a building. Use professional level detail work to make this worthy of a portfolio piece. Advanced level detail. So anything you learned in Illustrator that you want to show off, now's your time. Making simple rectangle houses with a triangle roof and a rectangle chimney and some cloud with a brush and a blue sky and green grass that are fills. You almost could have done that on week 2, right? Also, don't go into the symbols and plant a bunch of trees and flowers on your stick house and think that that counts too. So yes, you can use that stuff to accentuate, but not to make it look like that's all you learned in Illustrator. So basically, it's everything we've done. You're going to have a document, your artist statement, that explains your process and your main goals. It has to be 3/4 to a page long. So don't give me 4 sentences. Really explain what you did and how you challenge yourself. The original building is represented in your final, but it doesn't have to be an exact replica. You're going to include a printout of the house and the inspiration photo, like they did over there. And that Illustrator file will need to be uploaded by the end of that last class. So if you haven't looked at those already, you might want to walk around and kind of take a look at them and get some ideas. That's meant to be your capstone piece for this class, and most people end up using it in their portfolio at the end of this whole school, at the end of the degree also. You can go back and tweak it and add to it, but at this point, you really do have the skills to do that. So, any questions on what's due when and how we're going to get there? One last little talk next week, and that's it.
So for the last 2 weeks, we do have till the end of the class, not the beginning.
Correct.
For Photoshop or Illustrator.
Correct. Well, I'm only going to speak for this one while my brain is on, so for this class for sure. I can't even think about Photoshop right now. But yeah, at the end of class next week, your label and your web banner are due, and at the very end of class on the last day, the house is due. Okay? All right. If you want printouts of that rubric, they are there. I'm going to go and look at what's up with the Photoshop rubric, which I did update to make it 300 points. And I added the comment about using typekit fonts only. So remember that.
The web banner rubric doesn't open either.
Really? Is it?
For me.
Can everybody try on Blackboard to see if I botched up or if? Well, I probably did.
Works for me too.
Does not work for you. Are you in Chrome?
Yes.
Really?
Oh. Okay, so this one works, this one does not.
Right out loud. Okay. It's a problem with having multiple options on a page. All right, how about